Corey Payne.
And I'm Dustin Thomas, and we're with CPS. So today we're going to talk about the difference between electric and propane and grinding and polishing wet versus dry. And so over the last couple of months in talking to customers, I noticed that there's still some unknowns out there, even with seasoned veteran customers, been in the industry for 20 plus years. They have reservations over one method or the other. And so I think it would be beneficial for us just to talk about just the pros and cons for both, because there's, at the end of the day, and we both know there's no right or wrong. It just basically comes down to preference and some other factors. So I'd say let's go over those.
Yeah, absolutely. So, from our side of the fence, from the equipment manufacturer, it seems that the divide with electric propane is a lot of guys just don't know, and a lot of it could be partially geographical. So, for example, the Northeast, they have a lot of multi-level projects, which ceiling height and ventilation is a concern. So that may be a reason to steer a customer in that kind of environment into an electric machine. On the other hand, you get a job that maybe you don't have power, you don't have a generator, and you want a full-size machine. Propane's the way to go.
Yeah, I would say because I've definitely been on job sites where power is an issue, and being able to roll up on a job site and be able to roll your machine out and just fire it right up. But there's also, the propane tanks, right? So a lot of people have some confusion, or they just they just don't know about the fact that there are two different types of propane tanks, and some of them have both stems in the tank. So can you speak to a little bit of that?
Yeah, that's a big one. That's probably 90% of the calls that we get on our propane equipment is in somehow in relation to the propane tank. We run vapor draw system on our fuel system on our machines, and basically it's drawing off of an 80% fuel tube that drops into the tank here. So say this is our tank. The tube,
like a J.
Yeah, the tube is going to drop down to here. So basically, we want to fill our propane tanks liquid level to here. We're drawing the vapor off the top of the liquid, and a lot of times what happens is these machines will ingest that liquid propane, and it causes all sorts of running problems, from missing to sputtering to damaging regulators to mufflers. It's kind of a pain. There is a little bit more maintenance in that coming from the propane, going back to the propane versus electric side of it. Electric machines are a little bit lower maintenance. However, you have to have a generator. Once you get into a big three-phase machine, everything changes. You're at that point, you're in a commercial building with building power, three-phase, or you're getting into a generator.
Well, a lot of them, and again, there is some issues with the tools as well. Not necessarily issues, but there's also, we talked about earlier about the aggressiveness that water adds to the equation.
Yeah.
And so I think that kind of, people get in tune with their technique, and it's hard for them to change. So, but I think that there is definitely pros and cons to both versions for sure.
Yep.
So something else that I'd like to discuss is the difference between grinding and polishing wet versus dry. Because as we all know, this industry kind of was born on dry grinding, which was, I think it stemmed from natural stone polishing. And the story goes that they found out that they actually do the process dry. And so at least my background is primarily electric dry. But as the industry has progressed and they've got into big box retail, and there's been cords and electrical issues, propane wet has actually came more to the forefront. But with that, just like anything else, there's challenges, right? There's, as you mentioned before, grinding dry, you have to add a second piece of equipment to carry that dust. It's got HEPA filters in it. OSHA standards have now hit our industry in the last 4 or 5 years or so, probably longer. And so now we have to make sure that there's no airborne dust, which is, we have to, as an industry, we need to be responsible, because silica is insanely dangerous to breathe in. Yep. But on the flip side of that, there's still people out there that just don't understand slurry, and they're worried about the management, the way they manage it, the way they have to dispose of it. And in certain, especially in California, there's also even stricter regulations on the disposal of slurry that, you know, in other parts of the country don't necessarily have to be as thorough about how they get rid of it. So could you speak to a little bit of that?
Yeah, definitely wet has its advantages, and as does dry. Some of the pros to wet is obviously you're losing a piece of equipment for a lot of the steps. You know, you're losing your dust collector, you're losing your hose, but it does complicate things in that you have to manage your slurry.
Yeah, so that could look like you may need some chemicals or products to solidify the slurry, and you have to have your water source. Basically, some job sites don't have a water source, so sometimes you have to bring in your own water.
Yeah.
You probably need a slurry vac, if you're running as efficiently as you can, and then sometimes you have to neutralize the water. And so definitely the biggest con to wet, which I think is most of the issues that people are worried about, is getting the slurry into a container, and then how do you dispose of it?
Exactly.
So, there's wet vacs, there's auto scrubbers, there's different chemicals to neutralize the pH, because sometimes in different states, they call for different types of neutralization before it can be taken off.
Yep.
And so that's definitely can be looked at as a headache for some. But also on the pro side of that, you touch base on it. You were talking about how the tools are more efficient, they last longer.
Yeah.
More aggressive.
Yeah, definitely cut more aggressive wet for sure.
Yeah. So some of the cons to dry grinding and polishing is really that you just need an extra piece of equipment, which is a dust extractor that has a HEPA filter that's going to remove 99.99% of the airborne dust out of the air, and you need a HEPA filter for that piece of equipment to be OSHA certified, which most are at this point. But then also, you're basically tethered to another piece of equipment, and you have a 2 to 3 inch hose that you're dragging around behind you.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, definitely dry grinding. The cons, I would say, is going to be the cumbersome hose and the vac that you're going to constantly have to be dragging around every step with the grinder. Definitely the dust management is the only other thing, which is a little easier than slurry, just because they're all going to be contained in a Longo bag or a dust bin, depending on what kind of dust collector setup you have.
But something else that we haven't discussed is just the overall maintenance of the two systems, right? Because I would say that would be a con for the wet and a pro for the dry.
Yeah, I highly agree with that. The wet grinding, the slurry is really bad, especially when left on the equipment. It's good if you can get that stuff off as soon as you can. Dry grinding, usually the machines look great. We got guys coming into the shop with 2,000 hours on their grinders that grind dry only, and their machines look perfect underneath.
Yeah, so there's definitely a difference in the maintenance schedules.
Yep.
For sure.
Agreed.
So I think the last question is giving customers a couple of things to think about and ask themselves, and what is the best option for them? Is it electric versus propane, dry versus wet? So what are some questions that they can ask themselves to kind of help with this decision?
Yeah, I think the big one is just based on having the right tool for the job, which is going to come down to, is there power available on your projects when you're deciding electric versus propane? Because that's a big expense. The propane machines, you got to fill tanks. A full tank on a 32-inch grinder should last you, depending on the load situation, between 6 and 7, 8 hours, typically, depending on the load. Whereas electricity, you plug it in and you're good. That's a consumable item on a job site, is a propane. So that is an expense to consider.
With CPS, obviously we sell propane, we sell electric, and then we obviously have tools that are ran wet and dry, each. At the end of the day is who is going to provide you the best service and be on that job site to help you with decisions like this.
Yep, agreed. Yeah, our outside team is very, very hands-on with getting guys started and help them, check the boxes as far as electric, propane, dry versus wet. So,
absolutely. Thank you for watching this video, and stay tuned for the next one.